First up, you've got me. I'm Luke. I'm the regular host of our webinars. So if you've joined them before and had a little preview on the attendee list, some of you, many of you, are returning to us. So thank you for coming, and hopefully you know me by now. I'm the CEO and the founder of Mo. And you've got Rishita. So I first found you in a blog article where you were writing about change principles, which I really enjoyed. And having got to know you a little bit, I can absolutely confirm that you are an expert in this space. So anything that transformation and change, it's been a real joy getting to know you. So hopefully you're going to get lots of inspiring stuff from Rishita in just a moment. Next up, just to tell you a little bit about Mo, and you'll hear a little bit more about Rishita in a moment. Mo tends to help organizations improve employee engagement. So I was lucky enough to be at a conference in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, spoke to a lot of industry analysts, and the general message was that the employee engagement market is over-indexed in measurement, and we need to do more to drive change. Driving change requires action at all levels within the organization, and hopefully you're going to get some inspiring content to help you think about how you drive change within your own organizations. So without further ado, let's get going, shall we? Rishita, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke, and thank you all for joining. I've seen so many people joining. I mean, we've got Spain, we've got South Africa, Germany. That's fantastic. This is really nice. Thank you. It inspires me to be here with you and share a little bit more about my journey into change management and employee experience and engagement. So my background is in HR and in psychology. And what I will share with you today is sort of the accumulation of my experience over the last 20 years, where I've worked globally in the UK, in Dubai, in Africa. And now I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands with clients that are global. And what you see here in this quote is pretty much if we were to shorten it, it would be change is the new constant. And the last 2 to 3 years have seen a lot of change in organizations, and the average employee experienced on average about 10 planned enterprise-wide changes. We're talking about restructuring for efficiency. We're talking about cultural transformation for new ways of working. We're talking about the replacement of tech legacy or basic or measurements, right, based on how are we doing, sort of kind of creating a bit of an insight. And it seems that more change is coming. And, from what I've seen in the last few months, maybe year, 2 years, is that employees have hit a wall. In what way? Is in that there is sort of a shortage in employee willingness, right, to support more change. And in fact, the support of change has dropped to 43% in 2002, and that's down from 74% in 2016. So this gap is called transformation deficit. And the irony is that, the goals of transformation, are to redesign teams, structures, automation, all of which seek to ease the burnout, ease fatigue, improve employee experience. And it seems that what's happening is exact opposite of that. And the approach that I've seen is this sort of top-down approach from leadership through the organization with basically deploying a high volume of change communication. And that's not working. So what I'd like to explore today is this failure rate that we see in change in organizations, whether you believe in that 70% of transformations fail, or whether you believe that only 34% of initiatives are successful. Something that we're doing is not quite right. And what I'd like to bring to you today is my perspective on change, which brings together the head, the heart, and the hands. So that's basically what I'd like to do. So bear with me. This is going to go really fast. I have 20 to 30 minutes, so I won't be able to go into depth into any of these concepts, but I'll be able to kind of give you an insight or an overview how they kind of come together. But my first, you may ask, how did you get to this? Well, I got to this because of my first sort of big change management project with this large corporate organization, global. And they were implementing, it was part of digitalization program, and they were implementing knowledge management and a case management to improve efficiency, the employee experience, engagement. There was just a lot of time waste going between employees, right? So requests and emails, etc. So what was happening is that I came in to do this sort of change management. Wasn't my first, actually, a few years ago. And the business case was there. The belief was there. People knew what they wanted to do. They knew this was good. time for implementation, we roll it out, and nobody's using the system, whether it's for knowledge management, whether it's for case management. No one's using the new system, basically. And I was sort of gobsmacked because everyone was in so much agreement of it. And that was when I realized that even though change can be recognized as being good, a lot of the times it cannot be, but a lot of times it is. People struggle to change. They struggle to change because we're asking people to do something that's totally different to what they're doing. Organizations don't change, people change. And that's when I sort of realized, I need to kind of dive deeper into this. And I kind of started reading more about behavior, psychological behavior, mindset. And my approach kind of was born out of this. So let's get started. What happens is that organizational change is not organizational change, it's people that change. And a significant portion of people's actions are driven by habits. So I'd like to take you to habit formation. How does it work, right? So habits are automatic. They're routines or behaviors that are repeated over time. And the more we do them, the more automatic they become. Now I have a question for you. What would you say, and just pop it in the chat, what would you say is the percentage of behaviors or actions that we as human beings do on a daily basis that are automatic? What would you say is the percentage of our behaviors that are automatic? Just pop it in the chat, 75%, 95%. Okay, great. Okay, you guys. Spot on. I have actually never been somewhere where most people have got it wrong. It is really between that 75% to 90%. So it is quite scary to think that most of our day-to-day behaviors, patterns, thought patterns, right, even thinking, we're not aware of. We're actually not aware of the things that we do and why we do what we do. So habits are actually formed through a process called habit formation, and normally involves a cue, a routine, and a reward. And when a behavior is consistently repeated in a specific context, it's followed by a rewarding experience, it becomes ingrained as a habit. So a cue could be anything from an event, environmental context, time of the day, emotion. And the cue creates a context it creates a link between context and the routine. And the routine is basically the physical action, a thought, or a process, or an emotional response that you have as a result. And then we have the reward, which satisfies that need, it's a relief, maybe provides a relief, provides pleasure. And this is actually what reinforces the connection between the cue and the routine. So when we put this into sort of the workplace, we talk about what are the habits that we have in the workplace. I don't know, some of you, maybe you have your habits as well. Some of mine actually include the moment I walk in through the door, the first thing I do is go to the coffee machine, grab a coffee, sit down, and open my emails and start writing my to-do list, my task list. So we have daily routines in terms of habits in the workplace, checking emails, having regular meetings. Habits in the workplace also include, and often I see most companies don't think about this, it's about procedural habits, so workflows. How are we actually going through workflows? How do we create certain processes, right? How are employees interacting with one another? How are actually employees communicating? What are the communication patterns? How are the collaboration patterns? All of these actually happen as a form of habit. So this is actually very, very unconscious. So we have an opportunity here when we think about change management to tap into all of this. So daily routines, procedural habits, communication patterns, time management. Think about prioritization. Does it just happen on its own, or is it actually, very thought through? So all of these planning are all part of habits that we have in the workplace. And what I have seen happen in most companies is that when we're trying to bring in change to the organization and we focus on one thing only, we focus on changing the way people do things without really thinking about that, hey, what is the context, what are the cues, and what is the reward? So it's isolated. And this approach, as you can see, brings together the heart, the mind, and the heart, right? So the emotion, the mind, and, actually, what am I doing differently? So this is kind of a little bit of just an insight on how we basically form habits. And if we wanted to change habits, we need to have this in mind. And what the next slide will give you is a bit of a background on how you can change habits. Generally, when you want to change habits, there are two things you want to do. You want to either create a good habit or you want to break a bad habit. And without going into too much detail, if you focus on those questions, when you want to implement a change into the workplace, when you want to, create something that's different to what is currently being done, you want to ask the question, how can I make it obvious? That's the law of cue, the first law of cue. And that's really about making sure that changes often face resistance or inertia. So kind of make it clear, make it obvious. What is it that we're asking people to do? And a nice thing that I've found is to kind of create intention contracts or habit contracts with teams. So kind of create that intention, make it really clear what you want them to change, right? We focus on what we put our attention on. Number 2 is how can you make it attractive? This is all about intrinsic motivation. We don't often do that also in change. We think about all the outside things, but actually, no, what's in it for me? Why would I want to do this? This is really about intrinsic motivation and creating that sense of reward. And what's really nice here and works really well is having accountability partners. So you kind of pair people up together. Secondly, we have the third law of response, and that's really about, okay, how can I make it easy? In other words, how can I make it easier for people to adopt this change? How can I remove the friction? Friction actually is really, really important. Either you add friction to stop something or you remove it to change something. So yeah, yes, absolutely. Thanks, Lizzie. And then we have number 4, right? So the 4th law, and that's about how can I make it satisfying? And this is all about celebrating wins, all about recognizing and rewarding the effort that's being put into this change. And habit tracking is a great way to make this sort of change really satisfying and rewarding and to keep us focused on this. So very high level, a kind of, what I can actually invite you to do is to take a personal moment of reflection, not now, but maybe later, but think about an experience in the workplace that was successful for you. Or if it wasn't, why was it not successful? How did it meet each of these laws, basically? And where did you fall short? So then okay, what could we focus on next time? So this is a great way, kind of think first internally to then go outside. So that's about how we can change habits. I'm sorry if I'm speaking fast. When Luke said we have 20 to 25 minutes, I kind of thought, wow, I have a lot to cover in a very short amount of time. So I'd like to give you as much as I can. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. So then when we discuss habits, it's essential to understand the underlying cognitive process that influences their formation and impacts our behavior. And these cognitive processes are governed by what I'm also a mindset coach, but what is referred to in this part of the world as rules of the mind. They pretty much dictate, how we do things, our behaviors, our thinking process. So I'd like us to learn a little bit about the rules of the mind in a fun way. So I'll invite you to join me on a sort of short quiz. So I've got about 4 questions, and please do put your answers in the chat. So question number 1, I'm happy that the intensity is being welcomed. According to research, the human brain can form a new habit in approximately how many days? What would you say, 21 days or 66 days? So either put A or put 21. Okay, I think there is agreement that it is 21 days. But, so whilst that is true, new research has shown that it actually takes 66 days. So it just also shows you why sometimes it takes a little bit longer. We do the whole 3-week and it's still not catching, still not going. That's because new research has said it's actually 66 days. Some research even says it could go up to like sort of 90 days. So there's a little bit of variance as we know how these things work. But bear in mind that actually, it is long. So thanks for that. Number 2, people typically make decisions based on emotions 2 times faster than logic. Is this true or false? According to studies, people typically make decisions based on emotions 2 times faster than logic. Is this true or false? And I've got here true, 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 true. True, true. Yeah, great. That is true. That is absolutely true. And I think there is consensus here. If someone disagrees, let me know. Too true. Absolutely, Howard. Now, number 3. The brain prefers the status quo and resists change. I think this is an easy one. Look, why didn't you tell me this was too easy? Okay, yeah, true, 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 true. Absolutely right. Yes, thank you. And then
we have
we've
an
got
expert audience by the looks of things.
We do. I'm getting a bit scared now because it's like. And now we have the brain has a preference for conserving cognitive resources and exerting minimal effort whenever possible. Is this true or false? So we have true, 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 true. Absolutely. I mean, maybe you have heard of it also in terms of cognitive load, right? So that, we have a maximum cognitive load as humans, that we can handle, and tasks that are more complex, that are unfamiliar or require significant mental sort of resources of processing, they have a higher cognitive load. And our brain kind of just go, pushes away. So that's basically, the rules of some of the, and what I've done actually here with this quiz, I've introduced you to some of those rules of the mind that I spoke about, and these rules, as you can see, they encompass principles such as association, repetition, conditioning, sort of making things automatic in our brain, right? So neuroplasticity. There are lots of rules of the mind, and for the sake of our presentation and the time that we have, I have kind of picked the top 5, in my view, which are the most prominent or the most relevant when we talk about change and people in organizations. So the first rule of the mind is that in a battle between emotion and logic, emotion always wins. We saw that also in that question, in the questionnaire. And this rule highlights that actually, when emotion is high, it can actually lead individuals to reject change, even if it's rational. So here it's really important to tell your story right. Craft your message that resonates with people emotionally. It's got to go beyond data. It's got to go beyond statistics. And I find that most of the times when we communicate with the logic, why we need to do certain things, and what does it mean for that bottom line. But people don't resonate with that message. So purpose and meaning here are really, really big. In particular, the what's in it for me. How are we communicating the what's in it for me? Considering that the what's in it for me is very different to people, right? My what's in it for me might be different to Luke's. So how are we catering for this personalization, for this difference? And in particular, the formula of effort versus benefit is really important, because people do kind of a very quick calculation in their mind, which is, okay, what is the effort required for me to make this change, to do this differently? And what is that, in relation to the benefit or the value that I'll receive? And if the effort is larger, perceived effort or perceived benefit, then immediately you'll see some sort of rejection coming in from that perspective. Now, the second rule of the mind is that the mind learns by repetition. We know this, right? This is all about consistent reinforcement and practice. Most of the patterns, our thinking and behavior, come from our childhood, right? Things that we've learned from a very, very young age, because we're kind of conditioned to that, context, cue, reward, routine, etc. So here, which is really interesting, there's always a bit of discussion in organizations, because I always say there is no such thing as too much communication. I'm always about repeat. And then I have my stakeholders going, the ones that are working on the change, going, no, but I'm fed up of talking about this. But that is a huge gap between the people who work on change and constantly talk about it within their circle, and the people who are receiving this change, who actually are not as exposed to it. So we need to expose the people to the change. And I've also read somewhere that employees need to hear a message up to 5 times before they actually take action. And this is similar to the concept of customers, right? That your customers need to see your brand at least 7 times before they buy your product. So this is super, super similar to that. So repetition here is really your friend. The mind requires consistent exposure. When you feel sick of change and communication, that's when okay, we're actually reaching the point where some action might be happening. Now, third, your mind wants to stay with what is familiar while avoiding what is unfamiliar. And this highlights the natural tendency of our mind, right? To kind of, the mind perceives new things as a threat or a risk. So it triggers resistance and discomfort. And this comes from an evolutionary need that we have, right, to conserve energy and to stay safe. So when it comes to change in organizations, break change into manageable steps. You want to introduce gradual change, smaller achievable milestones, which allow people to gain confidence and become familiar with it. And often we want to go too fast, right? Because we're under so much pressure to deliver. But actually, what we need to kind of do is push back on this and go, no, but our employees' minds are not going to receive this information in the way that is going to work. So, we need to bring this understanding to our leaders when it comes to change. Then we have your mind responds to the pictures you create and words that you use. This is a really powerful one. And I find that this, out of all of them, this is really the one that drives the most acceptance for change, the most sort of desire to walking through that door of change. Hey, I support this, initiative. And this is the power of visualization and language, often underestimated as well. So this is where storytelling comes in, really creating that compelling narrative around change and engaging employees in that emotional level. So influencing their thoughts and behaviors. And later on, I'll show you some examples of how you can actually engage this visualization aspect of change. And finally, we know this one, your mind operates on the principle of least effort, right? This is really, this rule highlights the mind sort of effort to want to conserve energy, to seek more efficient ways to do things. We do that as individuals, actually. We're always looking for ways to make shortcuts, right? So the mind resists activities that demand excessive cognitive load. So in this way, I'm a big proponent of not the minimum valuable product, but the minimum lovable product. So how can we introduce and bring change to our employees, which is basically a step by step in a very iterative approach, starting with, what is that first thing, small thing that people are going to love, that they're going to kind of, you can talk into that, what's in it for me. So kind of start with that. So, and then also rely on current established patterns that are already familiar to people, or even rely on current cycles in the organization when you want to introduce change. So don't always start new, but what can you kind of piggyback on? So this iterative approach here is really, really important, that MVP or MLP, minimum lovable product. So these are the rules of the mind. I'm doing well, I think, but I'm going to ask for more than 5 minutes in a bit, but I'm almost there.
You're doing great.
Thank
You're probably
you.
going to be exhausted afterwards, and I apologize, but I'm really enjoying it, and you're doing a great job.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So what does this mean then? Does this mean that people have no sense of control? Does it mean that we kind of have, no agency over our actions? Well, no, it doesn't. Because, okay, even though a majority of our actions are automatic, that we do have some innate sort of needs, right, and desires. And this is where self-determination comes in. And this is the belief that you can control your destiny. And it's a combination of attitudes and abilities that lead people to set goals for themselves. And also it motivates them, right? It helps them take initiative to reach those goals. So SDT kind of posits that humans have an innate psychological need to be competent, to be autonomous, and to have this sort of feeling of relatedness. And these play a crucial role in driving motivation and engagement. And these are critical for change management. So when it comes to competence, this is all about feeling capable and competent in the work that we do, right? So in change management, it's about providing resources and training to increase the confidence in navigating change, right? It's about creating an environment where people can experiment. This is about learning by doing. It's not just about the theory telling you what to do, but it's also about providing the platform for learn and experiment and make mistakes. That's how you build competence and capability. Then the second thing we have is autonomy. This is about having control over our own actions. Don't bring change upon me. Don't just spring it. Don't tell me what to do, but actually invite me to co-create this change with you, make me part of that. So then I have this accountability and this sort of sense of ownership as well. So this is that bottom-up approach. You got to kind of meet halfway, right? The top down, bottom up. We have to meet. And then finally, we have relatedness. So this is the need to feel connected. This is about, social connections and relationships. And in change management, it's about creating inclusive and supporting environment where employees feel connected and valued. It's about open comms, learning communities, peer-to-peer support. So you name it. So this is sort of, this is where the heart comes in my approach. This is kind of tapping into that. Then incorporating these principles of SDT into change management, right? We can tap into intrinsic motivation. And this is what will increase individual engagement and create an environment where change can actually be successful. So what we've done then, we've basically covered the head with the rules of the mind. We covered the heart with the self-determination theory. And we covered the hands, right? The doing with the habits. So how does it all come together? And I'd like to introduce you to my modified outcome model for change. There are many change models, out there. I'm a practitioner in the article by ProSci, and I love this model because it's very much focused on people. It's the people side of change, as they call it. That's that kind of the logo. And what you see is the ADKAR has kind of a few steps, which is linear, but doesn't mean it's step by step. But, basically you can't, train somebody, on something without making them aware, right? So you kind of want to start with awareness and making sure that people are aware of what you're trying to do. And this is really about that rule of the mind of emotion, basically, is much more important than logic. So how are you communicating that change? So how are you building the awareness? All about the why, the storytelling, the purpose, and understanding that the what's in it for me, for your employees, is different. So how can you understand the differences? How can you understand what is important for one group of people and what's important for the other? You can do persona mapping and empathy mapping, for example. So crafting your message and storytelling and knowing your audience is really, really important. Secondly, we have the desire. The desire really is about kind of having people to say, hey, yeah, I support this change and I'm going to walk in through that door. And it's really about that visualization I talked about the visualization, right? The image and the words. And what I've seen that works really, really well is these future scenarios or design sessions with employees. People like to dream and like to feel that they've been part of something. Our brain doesn't perceive the difference between reality and imagination. So tap into that, get people to imagine, because they'll feel as if it's true. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So, these are some tricks that we can use here. Then we have the knowledge. This is all about making the unfamiliar familiar and the familiar unfamiliar. So what are those what are the things that we need to help our employees unlearn, right? What do we need to help them let go of, and what do they need to start doing differently? So this is about creating that sort of knowledge. Mind mapping is really important to understand how habits are being, formed in the organization. What does that workflow look like? So spend some time doing that, understanding that. And then we have ability. Ability is really about, okay, so I know what I need to do in theory, cognitively, I know what I need to do, but actually, how do I actually do it, right? Do I feel comfortable and confidence, that competence we talked about? Do I have that competence to do that? And here I found that there's usually two types of anxiety that come up in people. One of them is learning anxiety, right? Which is, can I really learn this? Can I really do it? And secondly is, if I can't, what will happen to me? And that's called survival anxiety. So these two are really, really real, and they're very much connected. So for you to be able to, lower survival anxiety, the only way to do that is to actually helping people lower their learning anxiety. So that's kind of like, a scale. And then finally, we have reinforcement, right, which is the R of the ADKAR model. And that's all about making sure people don't fall back into old habits. This is, again, that principle of least effort. So how can you create this change to be easy to sustain in terms of momentum? How are you recognizing and rewarding people to continue doing that? So this is pretty much kind of like the ADKAR model by encompassing the rules of the mind for each of the steps. So you begin to understand what is going through people's minds at each stage of change, and then how can you tap into their innate desires and motivations. And here also, I would say that it's pretty much also very much related to Daniel Pink's theory of motivation as well. So it's about mastery, purpose, and autonomy. So actually, it's very much related there. So there's certain things you can kind of bring together, I feel, to make your change process, program, communication a lot more specific and a lot more relevant for people, so that they can absorb this change in the way that will allow you to be more successful. And I think sort of it brings me to my last slide. Woohoo, I think I've done really well. And I guess, like, for me here, this last slide really brings my sort of the three concept together, which is this, for me, it's about treating people as humans, right? People are not commodities. We're not robots. There is a big push towards personalization in other industries. And for me, and if you ask me, like, I have a question, which is, when are we going to realize that only by personalizing change in a format that can be consumed by our people, so in a way that each individual can consume it, surely only then have we changed enough to allow real change in the workplace to happen. So this approach, this head, heart, and hands approach, is all about personalization and humanization of change. It's about bringing together the physical journey, which is often the sort of the biggest focus, right, in organizations, bringing it together with the emotional journey and the cognitive journeys that, the cognitive sort of aspects that we have in our brain. So this is really about kind of looking at people from the three things that drive us and our actions and our behaviors. I think that's it. So yeah, change is a journey, not an event. And this means that it's ongoing. It never stops. It never changes. It's not a program you can just kind of go and implement and walk away. It doesn't work like that. It never does. So, I'd like also to invite you to see change in a different way. And I know, Luke, you believe in this sentence as well, that you don't believe in change as a sort of an event, something that you just kind of go in and then you come out of.
No, I completely agree. And I think if our life wasn't driven by virtual context and a mute button, I'm sure you would have an applause right now, because I think you have done an absolutely wonderful job. Breathe. Everybody else,
breathe now.
everybody else, you can also breathe. I feel like that was like, when you have a really good smoothie, and the really good smoothie is packed with goodness and you can feel it as you drink it. I feel like that was like that. So everybody can be in a position now in which they let that sink in. I was going to summarize for you what we covered and then encourage anybody to ask some questions. So we started with change is constant. I think we've all heard that a lot now. We talked then about habits. How do you have them? How do you break them? How do you create new ones? And we talked about some models for helping do that. We talked about we did a quiz, actually. The quiz was fun. There's lots of experts in this room. We then did the power of the mind and the 5 kind of key factors there. We talked about motivation, model for change that was adapted based upon the ADKAR model. And then we talked about the holistic approach to driving change and the fact that very rarely is this the one moment, the lightning bolt, where you communicate this change to the organization. It's about consistency and driving transition. So if anyone has any questions, I would love for you to share them in the chat. There's one that's been shared by Luke already, but just to give everybody else the opportunity to catch up, I have one for you that I was thinking about as we went through the presentation. There's lots and lots there, but help just distill it all the way down for us. In the first transition, I often think about most short for moments, right? So I think about the world in moments often. Change for me is often about a moment of transition, which is the event, followed by a whole host of activities there afterwards. So I just wondered if you have like a practical playbook that you think about transition and then the short period after that first event, in which people could walk away with one simple or 2 simple things that might be really useful for them to think about if they do need to drive or accelerate change in their company.
Yes. So I think I love what you mentioned about transition. When I hear of transition, I immediately think of rituals. And rituals, the need for rituals for humans is innate, right? We have this inherent need to articulate times of profound transition and experience, whether it's, and we can do this at work and we can do this at home, right? In our life, whether it's weddings or funerals or, whatever it is, right? We always mark change in our life with with an event, with a transition, with a ritual. So I'd like to actually invite you all to think about rituals in the workplace. We have a lot of rituals already, but they're unconscious. We don't realize they're in place. But I would say be intentional about them. And when it comes to change, I love transition rituals in the sense of disrupting what we're trying to do, right? And it's about sort of identifying, right? What is it that we're trying to change? Interrupting it or disrupting it. So like, hey, let's kind of grab that and then installing the new. So have a ritual for the identify. We can do it together, design session. Let's come together, co-create this, right? We know we need to let go of this or we need to bring this. How do we do it? Second, have a ritual to interrupt or disrupt. I love creating sort of, you can do like a ritual in during an offsite where you can like burn certain things that you want to let go of, or you can write it down, scrunch it up, throw it somewhere. So you can be as creative as you want. And the second one is the install. That's like basically intent, like I said earlier in the other slide, like having an intention contract or create something which kind of helps us to be really mindful about what we're trying to bring. So I would kind of use rituals as providing us with a bit of structure, right? So on the smaller scale, they give us structure on change, and on the grand scale, they actually support us with a bigger narrative of that change. I hope that answers your question.
No, it was great. I'm a huge fan of habits, rituals, routines, and how they shape our everyday working patterns. Because I think post-COVID, we've lost a lot of them because they used to be face-to-face quite often.
Yeah.
And I think in this digital context, like thinking about how you create rituals online or in person consciously can make a really big difference. We've got a few questions that have come in, so anyone that can hang around for the next couple of minutes, feel free to share a question or listen to the responses to some of these. The first was from Luke, which is not me, Luke Reddle, which is how important is it to make your employees aware if they have a voice in the change, opportunity to voice concerns, or vote in the change? They will directly have an impact on the actual decision of the change.
Yeah, so basically, there are times, and let's not kid ourselves, right? There are times where, change has to happen. It's a must. It's a given. It's a decision. There's no democracy, right? It's coming. We've got to deal with it. Now, what happens is that a lot of the times, what you can do is just give employees the platform to voice their concerns. It's catharsis, right? It's, what I found is that by just giving employees a platform to share their concerns, having your sponsorship coalition or your sponsor in a room, sort of saying, hey, this is why we're doing it. This is why we need to do it. And why now? And actually, what happens if we don't do it? Because people can actually sometimes associate better with that. What happens if we don't do it? And then, bring the platform to just get out of my system what I need to say. And at the end, I may not be able to impact whether the change goes ahead or not, but what else can we give our employees in terms of some sort of ownership for maybe how the change is implemented, how it's communicated, forming a task force, etc. So there are sort of little things like this that we can do. But ultimately, what I found is that catharsis is really, really important, and it actually solves a lot of that resistance.
I think often transparency can help, right? Is you can or you can't influence this decision too, but sometimes just letting stuff go. It's part of that emotional response to stuff, right? So that you can start to make your decision with your emotion and back it up with the logic as you start to get some of these things out.
Absolutely.
Cool. Next one is, what's the best way to measure the impact of your work or initiatives, either quant or qual? Change management's one of those notoriously hard things that it's often the input rather than the output that you're measuring, right? You're asking people to change behaviors to make a difference on the outcome. So how would you think about measuring the impact of the work and initiatives?
So it all depends on the purpose of that change, right? So, for example, at the moment, I'm working with a client on a D&I project. So we're launching a whole huge D&I strategy for the global organization, and it came to me as these are the things we need to do. And I kind of said, okay, let's kind of put a stop to that, but let's go back. Why are we doing it? What are we trying to achieve? What would be the impact, right, of this initiative in terms of behaviors, attitudes, actions? What's the narrative in the organization? What do you want people to be writing on a LinkedIn post or on a Glassdoor review, right? So what are we doing this for? Who are doing it for, and why are we doing it? And that, for me, is actually where the impact of the work of change management comes in, of the initiatives. And you can have actually both input. So I think input is good to have, but input is doesn't give you much. It just gives you some of that how, but it's about having the output and then the impact. And you can have this in terms of initiatives or strategy statements, and where you can link it to the KPIs and then the impact. But it always ultimately comes down to the question of, why are we doing this? And then why 5 times to get to the bottom of that. And if it's not, and if the reason is not good enough, you'll soon come out, and then you can start to have different conversations then and really build the narrative, help build the narrative. Yeah.
I've become an even bigger fan of Brené Brown since I saw her about 2 weeks ago in Vegas, and she's talked about her 5 C's model in this, which is also super helpful. It's a really, really simple thing. If you Google it, or we'll share it in the follow-up, but that can be useful too in that context. The next then is from Lloyd, complimenting the session, but also asking you to share thoughts on shifting sands during the course of rolling out change, meaning the context of the business changes during the transformation program, and any suggestions on how to handle this. the obvious one, I guess, of the window of the change.
To be honest, yeah, this is where I always want to divide change into iterations or increments. I am really a fan of kind of understanding, okay, what is the whole change A to Z? What is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? Doing change this way allows you to actually adapt to context changes, adapt to changes in, sort of business needs, strategy, etc. So I believe that when you are looking at implementation of any change, look at it from this perspective. When can you deliver phase 1, 2, 3, and actually educate stakeholders on the need of having change done in this way, to take into account that need of constant change. So iterative way of working, very agile, iterative, incremental, value driven. So one of the things that I do very often is to think about what is the value of the work that we're trying to achieve. Map out that value, be really specific. What value will this work bring, right? And in each of your deliverables, make sure this value is explicit. And that way you can actually convince your stakeholders of this iterative approach, because you're saying, we're delivering value first and foremost at this stage, that stage, that stage. And when that's delivered, we can then go on to the second stage, and it gives us time to, change direction.
Perfect. We're going as quick fire on the questions because we've got 2 minutes left as we are for the rest of the presentation. So I apologize. You can breathe in a minute. You'll be all right. You can breathe in a minute. The next one is, in order to factor in how different people experience change, how do you cater for these different needs? I can imagine optionality is important, but do you have any other useful tips?
I think generally what I do with this, I invite these people to a workshop, and they basically co-create what the end looks like. Because ultimately, when you are talking about people's having different needs, you talk about different also pains, also different objectives, what they're trying to achieve, different perspectives. There's only so much you can gather from a workshop. So I always say optionality is one which we can kind of offer from where we are, but I would say, bring them into a room with you and brainstorm on what is possible. And here, what I like to do is to bring in the constraints already. So, it's not a wide workshop and we just kind of, go and, put everything into a PowerPoint. No, it's about, okay, these are the constraints. So this is in scope, that's out of scope. Now, what can we do? So kind of make it really real.
The other thing I often find is the power of the line manager as a channel, because they provide such a rapid feedback loop that's contextual to their own team. It makes the scale of change feel less grand and significant. And the read on even like classic things like the emotional response curve in change, for a line manager managing a team of 10, it's easier to understand and therefore personalize your actions at that scale, rather than it is a transformation exercise across like 1,000 people, right? So yeah, cool. Last question then is, I've been reading up on the debate around bringing staff back to the office, still contentious, for up to 5 days a week. I can't see how it will work without changing the workplace. What's your comment?
I'd love to know a bit more about what you mean by changing the workplace. I don't know what you mean by that. How I read this is also kind of to think about, again, it goes back to the self-determination theory, rules of the mind. It's about how can we get the best out of people, right? Where are they in their life right now? What are they needing? How can we actually create inclusivity in the workplace? And yes, I have seen a lot of organizations wanting to bring staff back. I'm in that client right now, which has done the same, and it's created quite a bit of sort of contentious. But what I've seen happen is that line managers have taken a bit of a different approach to it and personalized it a little bit more. It doesn't answer your question, but I'd love to know a bit more context of what you meant by changing the workplace. So maybe happy to connect with you offline if you want.
Yeah, one for LinkedIn maybe.
Yes, happy to do that.
Perfect. I'm conscious of time. We promised it would be around 45 minutes. So we are done, Rishita. You've been absolutely amazing. That smoothie was the best. It was packed full of goodness. And thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you to everyone that's been here. We'll share the recording, likely the slides, because they're in the
that's fine
anyway.
Yeah.
And then we will send you a brief follow-up. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to continue the discussions and support you on your journey.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.